Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ready for Merge show. This is the very first pilot episode of my new podcast show, Ready for Merge. I had wanted to make this a live episode, but I think there actually is some issues with the stream. So I do apologize for anyone who's not able to tune into this show live. The recording of it is going to be published after the fact on my Substack and all of my other channels. So yeah, for anyone who's watching it after it goes live or after the live recording, you'll still be able to catch it. For anyone who is able to see me, hear me, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to get this series and get this show finally launched. There's been a lot of anticipation, I feel like, going into this, so it feels good to just finally be able to start. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about literally everything you as listeners should expect from the show. What the show is about, how frequently it's going to be coming out, all of the details, all of the format of the show, who's going to be on the show, everything that you need to know. So that is what we're getting into. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and let's dive in. So, first question, what is the Ready for Merge show? The Ready for Merge show is a podcast series about the code changes that are being implemented and also debated and discussed for inclusion and integration into the Bitcoin and Ethereum code bases. So Bitcoin and Ethereum are the world's most valuable blockchain technologies. They're also decentralized technologies, and they're not technologies that are static. As with any software, these protocols need maintenance, and there's a team of developers that are constantly thinking about improvements to be making to these protocols, various features that can be added, features to be removed or deprecated. And so they're pretty important technologies, but they're also technologies that are not static, that again are constantly changing. And so this show is really about informing listeners about how these technologies are evolving, how these very important, the most important blockchain protocols in the world are changing. So if you are invested in these technologies in any capacity, if you are a Bitcoin asset holder, I don't know, invest in ETH perhaps, if you are a business building on top of the Bitcoin protocol or the Ethereum protocol, if you are like a service or an infrastructure provider on top of these protocols, if you're a validator or a miner that's contributing to the security of these protocols, if you are invested in these ecosystems, this show is relevant to you. This is a show that you want to listen in on a regular basis to stay informed and stay up to date with how the Bitcoin and the Ethereum protocols are changing, because at some point or another, the changes that are happening on these protocols are going to impact you, impact what you're doing, either, the investments that you're making or the business or service that you're operating. These protocol changes are going to impact you. And I am designing these shows, or creating these shows and making these shows so that it is accessible to a wide audience of stakeholders, not just technical stakeholders. I'm going to try and explain all of these technical changes and the protocol evolution of Bitcoin and Ethereum in a non-technical way, so that literally any stakeholder in the ecosystem should be able to understand what's going on and stay informed. I myself am a non-technical person. I don't have a background in programming. I don't have a background in, like software engineering, but I have spent the last 7 years of my life tracking the evolution of these protocols and communicating in a way that is very accessible to people of non-technical backgrounds. So if I can understand it, you can understand it. And so that is really, in a nutshell, what the Ready for Merge show is and what you can expect to get out of tuning in every week. A little bit about the format of the Ready for Merge show. Ready for Merge is going to actually be a bi-weekly show. Couple of reasons for this. The first is that I do cover the protocol development of Bitcoin and Ethereum on a weekly and a more granular basis already on my Substack. For Ethereum, because there's so much going on with the protocol, I actually cover Ethereum on a twice weekly basis through my ACD After Hours Substack newsletter. And then I cover Bitcoin development on a weekly basis through the BTC Before Light newsletter. However, I realized that can also be a lot of content for readers and for stakeholders to ingest every single week. I was thinking about ways to kind of make the information more digestible, not just from the perspective of how I explain these code changes, but also from the perspective of time and making all this information just more easier for people who have other full-time jobs and don't have time to be like really in the weeds of all the protocol developments happening all the time. So bi-weekly to make this show kind of more spaced out. You're going to get the high level of what's happening on a once in 2 weeks basis. And hopefully that means that, yeah, the information doesn't take away too much from whatever else you're focusing on, perhaps your Bitcoin business or your Ethereum staking service. You can once every 2 weeks tune into the show and get exactly what you need about what's happening to the protocol and what changes might affect you. This show, I'm going to try and aim it to be half hour long. I love short podcasts. I'm one of those listeners that if it's an hour long conversation, it's hard for me to stay focused. So I'm going to try and make these bi-weekly briefs very short, very to the point, no fluff. You just get what you need, the information that you need. And I'm going to try and make these shows live every 2 weeks. And hopefully we'll get the stream working for everyone for the next show. Every other week, when I'm not doing the bi-weekly brief, my plan is to have longer guest episodes. So for those of any of you that are returning listeners from my prior podcasts, I hosted The Infinite Jungle, I hosted Mapping Out ETH 2. I know that you guys love my interviews and my conversations with developers. So I do hope to keep those around. Those guest episodes are going to be subject to, of course, guest availability. And I'm not going to lie, it's been kind of hard to get the Bitcoin side of guests lined up. But I hope to have some success with that over the course of this show. So every other week you can expect a guest episode. I'll be sure to tee them up so you guys know what's happening. And those guest episodes will probably be longer in duration. They'll be targeted at a particular code change or a particular upgrade that's coming up on Bitcoin or Ethereum, diving into it with subject matter experts. And to get, those guest episodes started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start publishing my Meet the Devs interview series on this Ready for Merge show. This is a series that I created for my Substack for my small set of premium subscribers. And Meet the Devs is a series that does one-on-one conversations with Ethereum client developers. These are the developers that are maintaining and implementing Ethereum code changes. It ask them about their role, what they think of the Ethereum protocol development process, its different pain points, thoughts on governance. These are really illuminating conversations and helpful conversations for understanding Ethereum protocol development and governance, and also just decentralized protocol development and governance in general. Lots of learnings there, even for Bitcoin development. So that is going to start airing next week on a bi-weekly basis. I'll start publicly launching these interviews. And I hope that makes some people happy, because I know a lot of people have been asking me to open up those episodes more broadly. They want to listen to it on RSS feeds. They want to be able to share it with their friends and family. And now everyone will be able to do that because I'll start airing the Meet the Devs interviews live. Not live. Well, they're pre-recorded. They've already been recorded, but I'll start to share them every Wednesday on an alternating basis with these bi-weekly briefs that are going to be shorter and just your need-to-know updates on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development for ecosystem stakeholders, no matter who you are and no matter where you fall in the technical literacy, spectrum. So that's the show. That is Ready for Merge, what it's about, who should be listening, and what you can expect from the show moving forward, its format. And I'm really excited. This is my first show that I'm launching independently. I've put in quite a bit of thought, probably too much thought, into this show. I should say very briefly, I'll make a brief note about this, the reasoning for the Ready for Merge title. Also, look at these cards. I got them custom made from Staples. Kind of cool. They're my little note cards. The name for the show, Ready for Merge. I know a lot of people have been telling me that it brings connotations of the merge upgrade on Ethereum, the pivotal upgrade, the most important upgrade in Ethereum's history that transitioned Ethereum from a proof of work to proof of stake blockchain. And yes, all of my podcasts before have all been focused on Ethereum protocol development. But the merge is really, it was an important upgrade, but it's not the only upgrade that is important in Ethereum's history. Pectra, an upgrade that happened earlier this year, that was the largest upgrade in Ethereum's history by number of EIPs. This upcoming upgrade, Fusaka, which we'll hopefully discuss a little bit later on in this show, in this episode, that is an upgrade that's going to bring some pretty radical changes to Ethereum's networking layer and also data availability capacity, this and scalability as a data availability layer. My point is, there's some pretty big code changes that are still to be merged into Ethereum's code base. Yes, the merge was important, but it is by no means the only upgrade that stakeholders should care about and that stakeholders will be impacted by. Similarly, there are some pretty major code changes, believe it or not, that are coming in the pipeline for Bitcoin's development. When you think about the changes that will have to happen for Bitcoin's quantum resistance, when you think about some of the controversial code changes that have been included in the latest Bitcoin Core major release, V30, which I'm going to talk about more on this episode as well. And those code changes, those merges that are happening to the Bitcoin protocol are extremely important, I would argue, for even Ethereum stakeholders to know, because Bitcoin is the most valuable cryptocurrency in the world. It is also the crypto asset that is by far the most institutionally adopted. I know Ethereum is getting there. Ethereum in its own right is the most widely adopted, has set up the most widely adopted standards for smart contract development, be it with the Ethereum virtual machine or the Solidity smart contract coding language. Each of these protocols in their own right are just critical to the value and the innovation that is happening in the crypto industry. So I would argue that for stakeholders, it's really important to stay up to date about the merges that are happening in both code bases. And with the Ready for Merge podcast title and show, I'm hoping to emphasize that these merges are just as important, if not more important, moving forward, to know about. And for stakeholders to care about. So yes, it does bring connotations of a very important upgrade in Ethereum's history. I hope that that importance is something that will, make my listeners curious, but also kind of parallel that to a lot of the important merges and code changes that are still to come in Bitcoin and Ethereum's future that we'll be talking about and getting a lot deeper in this series, in the Ready for Merge show. So yeah, that's a little bit of the name meeting. I mean, honestly, do I kind of regret calling this show Ready for Merge? Maybe a little. There are other names that I thought about after the fact that I wish I kind of had gone with, but you know what? I've already made my bed. I've already published, launched, and it's too late now to really change things up. So here we are, and I'm just going to stick with it and run with it. I've already thought too much about the launch of this show. We're just going to move on ahead and see how things go. So yeah, that's the show. That's everything. Please let me know what you think of this podcast launch, especially if you're returning listeners from some of my other podcasts. I'd love to know what you think of the idea for the show, its format, wherever you're getting this. Just comment and tell me what you think. I'm all ears, and I love to hear from listeners and people that are getting my content. I want to make sure that it's informative and useful for you who are listening. So we've got a little bit of time. Honestly, I kind of wish we had more time, but I wanted to give a sample of what listeners can expect from the show moving forward. I see some of the comments actually already. Hello, Jeremiah. Um, Good. Thank you for listening. Um, I want to give you guys a little bit of what you can taste, a little taster of what you can expect from the biweekly briefs moving forward. So I'm going to give you the lowdown, a super quick little high level overview of what you need to know about Bitcoin development and Ethereum development right now. Bitcoin, on the side of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Core V30 major release does look like it is on track to be finalized this Friday, October 10th. The last I checked, there really weren't any major blockers. And things seemed on track. Bitcoin developers had published the third release candidate for that for V30, and there hadn't been any major discussions about bugs or issues that would prevent its release. So now developers are close to finalizing V30, and with that, this is the moment that the entire Bitcoin community has been waiting for. Now is the time where proponents that have said that this V30 release is going to have catastrophic effects, just awful effects on the Bitcoin network. Now is the time for that talk to turn into action, for claims about the radical shift in Bitcoin implementations that's going to take place after V30. As a bit of background, for all of Bitcoin's history, the main implementation has been Bitcoin Core. There really is no meaningful client diversity, I would say, on Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin Core. There's a few other minor implementations, but they're really just copies of Bitcoin Core with very few minor tweaks and not maintained by a large group of developers like Bitcoin Core is in terms of its Bitcoin Core's financing and all of the people that are running Bitcoin Core. But with how controversial Bitcoin V30 has been, many critics of Bitcoin Core and this new upgrade have said that, you know what, after this V30 release, everyone's going to shift over to Bitcoin knots, alternative implementations, and it's going to be a complete shift. This is really what's going to change the popularity of Bitcoin Core implementations moving forward. As in, people are going to shift away from Bitcoin Core. And that with the V30 release, for people that are running on Bitcoin Core V30, these node operators are going to face a lot more difficulty in running their software because there's going to be a whole bunch of junk data and illegal content that's going to be published onto the blockchain. And all these claims that there's just going to be these catastrophic effects. And up until now, the V30 release was still being worked on. So a lot of it was talk. A lot of it was conjecture. And there were some statistics and some data to show that implementation popularity for Bitcoin knots and alternative Bitcoin implementation was going up. But there were also concerns that some of that data was skewed. But now, with Bitcoin Core V30 very close to finalize, once it is finalized and once it is ready for node operators to adopt or choose not to adopt, now is the time. Now is the time to see whether all this criticism and all this drama, if it really materializes into true change and true impact, negative impact on the cohesiveness of Bitcoin's client diversity, the type of data that's being stored onto the Bitcoin blockchain. This is the time where we're going to have to see whether all those claims come to fruition. So I'm actually quite excited for there to be less talk and just more all the critics of Bitcoin Core and the V30 implementation, time to put your money where your mouth is. Don't run V30 if that's what you said you're going to do. For talk on Twitter and all these other platforms to just materialize into real action and to see with the data and the numbers what actually happens on chain with the V30 release going out. So that, I would say, is the biggest update on the Bitcoin development side. Very quickly, because I have been hearing just a bit of confusion about what this controversy actually is with the V30 release. And also, for any of my listeners that haven't been following along, most of my listeners, I'm sure, are probably from the Ethereum community, just as a little bit of a background. The most controversial code change in the V30 release is a uncapping of the data carrier size in the op return field of Bitcoin transactions. That's a very technical term. Let me break it down. Op return, it's a very specific type of transaction output that only gets created if your transaction isn't creating new UTXOs, new Bitcoins. So every time you spend Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain through the Bitcoin protocol, your Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that you spend, creates new UTXOs. It creates these new like outputs where, you know, some of that Bitcoin will be going to the miner who gets the fee from the transaction. There's going to be a little bit of Bitcoin that gets sent to whoever you're trying to send the Bitcoin to, the other address. And then that will create these new UTXOs that are linked to the new address. And that new address has the ability to then spend that Bitcoin and move it over to another address for whatever reason that they want, that user wants. And so there is this idea of a whole UTXO set. You can kind of think of it from Ethereum's perspective, like the state. It has all the data of all the available Bitcoins that can be spent and whose address it's linked to, and how many Bitcoins are available to be moved around. And they're all called UTXOs. There is the acronym, or like the explanation for that. It's like unspent transaction outputs or something like that. I should know this. But anyways, it's not relevant. It's not super important to this explanation. Op return outputs, though, are very unique because they're specifically just for putting data onto the Bitcoin blockchain. They were created so that if somebody does want to, you know, put a little additional data about their transaction, like a timestamp, a message, perhaps for third-party protocols that are working on like token standards that tie certain data back to the Bitcoin blockchain. The op return output was created for those kinds of use cases. And what's cool is that when you have an op return output, it doesn't create, it's specifically only so that new UTXOs aren't created in that transaction. So nodes can automatically know that these outputs are not relevant to the full UTXO set. So you do need to spend a bit of Bitcoin just for the transaction fee of sending that the op return transaction, but the output that gets created, there is no coins that are moving to a new address. It's just data that's being put into the blockchain, that's being stored onto the blockchain. And with op return, there is a parameter called the data carrier size that basically sets a cap on how much data can be input into this field. What's cool about this is that it's not actually like a consensus rule where a transaction will be invalid if it exceeds the cap. It's just a default setting that limits, that's part of the relaying policy of a Bitcoin node. So Bitcoin nodes they store pending transactions into their what's called a mempool, and transactions that are being relayed around the network, there are certain parameters that nodes will use to either decide whether to relay a transaction to another node and to input it into their pending pool of transactions of mempools. So it's not really just the data carrier size. There's things like minimum VSATs per byte, which is basically the minimum amount of fee that you would pay to send a Bitcoin transaction through the Bitcoin network. And for some nodes, they have the default minimum VSATs per byte set to a certain value so that they're not relaying transactions that have absolutely no fee attached to them, which helps prevent like their node from being spammed. So this is very similar. Data carrier size is just this policy. It's part of the relay policy of a node that determines which transactions they'll relay around into the network, not necessarily what transactions are considered valid by consensus rules, which means that if you have a different policy or change the default for your data carrier size, You can do that, and you can send a transaction that has a different data carrier size and send it directly to a miner, and they can include that transaction into a block, and that block will still be considered valid. And this is relevant because for the rationale for why Bitcoin Core developers have uncapped the data carrier size, basically done away with that default limit on how much data can be put into the op return field, is they've noticed that over the last, basically since the Taproot upgrade in 2021, there has been a rise in using op return for this metadata, for arbitrary data being put into the Bitcoin blockchain, and that transactions have been, that exceed the data carrier size limit, have just been being sent directly to miners rather than being put into the mempool, because many of these nodes will not relay those transactions. And so that's caused concern that this could lead to the mempool being bypassed, and given that it's not really like a consensus rule anyways, Bitcoin developers they created this note earlier this year explaining that they're going to be uncapping this data carrier size to just make the protocol more in line with the reality of how the Bitcoin protocol is being used, and the fact that this data carrier size is not really this data carrier size is not really sorry, I lost my train of thought. This data carrier size is not really being used or adhered to by users. So that was the controversial change. And it was controversial because people that disagreed with that change were concerned that if you uncap the data carrier size and change that default, then you're just going to be the Bitcoin blockchain is just going to be overrun with people exploiting that. It's funny that I say exploit, but basically take advantage and just start putting a bunch of arbitrary data onto Bitcoin through the op return field, which technically people can do right now, although it is a bit harder because you have to send it directly to a miner, and most Bitcoin Core node, if they operate on the default setting, will not relay your transaction. But after Bitcoin V30, that default setting is changing. And so a lot of proponents against Core were saying that this is going to lead to just an overrunning of junk data on the blockchain, illegal data being put onto the blockchain. Bitcoin should be money. It should not be used for these tokens, these programmability, these other like random use cases for Bitcoin, labibus should not be used on the block. Bitcoin should not be used for these kinds of use cases. And so there's quite a bit of fears, a lot of disagreement, a lot of back and forth, and efforts to try and get this feature changed in Bitcoin V30. Lo and behold, Bitcoin Core developers did not back down, although they did made some very slight minor changes to like documentation regarding the future of this data carrier size parameter that I, in my opinion, don't think really changes much. But that's why a lot of proponents against this change have been saying they'll use alternative implementations from Core, like Bitcoin knots. They'll change the default setting that's in V30 so that the cap stays in place. And one thing that I just want to note that I wrote in my most recent BTC Before Light newsletter around Bitcoin development is that what's interesting is Bitcoin Core developers really do care about junk data going onto the blockchain. Now, op return is a very dedicated field and space and way for people to store Bitcoin data onto Bitcoin, but they're very against people using other methods to store data onto blockchain that might actually bloat the UTXO set size or might actually burden node operators or negatively impact kind of like make it more burdensome for node operators to continue to operate their nodes. And so recently, over the last couple of weeks, they've been discussing quite a few other areas or potential ways in which people could try and put junk data onto the blockchain through using like a field called script pub key, and potentially Core developers may want to restrict the data cap there to discourage anyone from using that field for putting data onto Bitcoin. That's traditionally script pub key is traditionally where you can set a limited amount of rules around how your Bitcoin should be spent, like after what block height, how many signatures are required for this Bitcoin to be spent. The scripting language for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, more Ethereum listeners, you can kind of think of it like the programming rules or like the smart contract code that you could attach that will dictate how coins should be spent. But of course, the scripting language for Bitcoin is far more restricted and very limited. But the point is that Bitcoin developers are they were discussing ways in which perhaps we can restrict how much data is being put into the field, where people should just be using that field for determining and setting the rules for how Bitcoins should be spent, not putting in arbitrary data. Arbitrary data should go into the op return field or like the witness part of a transaction, which is prunable from Bitcoin nodes. And they were talking about how, perhaps users could potentially try and put arbitrary data directly into Schnorr signatures, which are these new type of signatures that were created through the Taproot upgrade in 2021. Conclusion there was that no, it's actually probably not very feasible for people to do that. But the point is, there's now because of all this drama around op return, there is quite a bit of talk around how to make Bitcoin more secure against arbitrary data and ensure that those use cases are, if they are going to be like done on Bitcoin and Bitcoin developers can't stop people from trying to put data onto blockchain, perhaps they can encourage that kind of data to live in such a way on the blockchain that it doesn't bloat Bitcoin's UTXO set, etc. So kind of interesting. This is definitely probably going to be a topic of conversation that impacts features and new upcoming releases for Bitcoin Core. Definitely stay tuned for the aftermath of what happens after the Bitcoin V30 code changes are finalized, which again, looks like it's on track for this Friday, October 10th. I am already starting to go over time because I think this is already at the 30-minute mark, but I want to very quickly give you some Ethereum updates for my Ethereum listeners. As a side note, these episodes will have timestamps, and I will also put these like little texts. Ethereum updates for when I talk about Bitcoin updates, and then when I switch over to talking about Ethereum updates from Bitcoin to Ethereum or Ethereum to Bitcoin. And I have a post on my Substack that explains in more detail why I think it's really important that crypto stakeholders, people that are invested in this industry, whether you're more involved in Ethereum or more involved in Bitcoin, why it's important to know about both and what's going on in both, regardless of what you think of, developer, he said, she said, the founders of whichever protocol, whatever you think about the history of these blockchains. That these protocols, what they're doing, how much value is locked into them, how much innovation is being driven by these protocols. It's very relevant, I would say, for all crypto stakeholders, and why I think it's important to know about both. But let's just say you read that post and you still don't care. I'm still going to make it easy for my listeners to be able to switch and just get the updates that you are most interested in. And if you really, really, really don't want to listen to Bitcoin updates or don't want to listen to Ethereum updates, I'm going to have timestamps. And for example, I would put the timestamp for Ethereum updates right here to notify you guys that now I'm talking about Ethereum. So for Ethereum, Fusaka is coming up. Yes, Fusaka is Ethereum's 17th execution layer upgrade. I say execution layer upgrade because for any of my listeners that are not familiar, Ethereum was one blockchain, one protocol, and then after the merge, it basically became two protocols merged together. So there was the Ethereum blockchain, and there was a second blockchain, Beacon Chain. And then after the merge, after Ethereum's transition to proof of stake, Beacon Chain and the Ethereum blockchain merged together. And so if you count the upgrades that have happened all on the Ethereum blockchain and all on the Beacon Chain, Ethereum developers have upgraded Ethereum more than 20 times. It's a lot. I will probably lose count after Fusaka and stop talking about how many there are. But all of these upgrades have been hard fork upgrades, which means that they don't restrict the consensus rules of Ethereum in a more narrow way, more backwards compatible way. They are just new rules. They're just entirely new consensus rules. And if you don't upgrade, you are booted off the network, or you're basically going to be on a different version of Ethereum than everybody else is on. So consensus really does matter for Ethereum upgrades far more than it does with soft forks that happen on Bitcoin. Because if you don't upgrade, if you do not comply with this upgrade, node operators, you will lose access, connection to the blockchain. So unless you're really confident that there's a lot of other people that are going to be mining a certain version of Ethereum with you, you're going to lose a lot of value and connectivity with the main chain. So hard forks, very important, very risky. Ethereum developers have done it quite a bit, and Fusaka is the next one. It's coming up very quick. They are on their final rounds of testing for Fusaka. They upgraded the first of 3 public testnets, the Holeshki testnet, last Wednesday, October 1st. What? Okay. Not crazy, nothing catastrophic. There were 2 bugs that were found in the Nethermind and the Lighthouse clients. Clients are these implementations, different software that users can use to connect to the Ethereum blockchain and participate in validating the Ethereum blockchain. Unlike Bitcoin, there are more than 10 client implementations that people can run. There's technically, I guess, like more than 5 because you do need dual consensus layer and execution layer client implementations. There's only like 5 of each. But anyways, so developers found some bugs that, not major ones, but found some bugs after the Holeshki testnet upgrade. And yeah, would have been not catastrophic for the testnet, but definitely would have been concerning if they were found on mainnet. So it is good that they were caught in advance. What's interesting about Fusaka is that it's going to be the first upgrade where that upgrade is actually bundled. It's a bundled upgrade of like 3 different hard forks. There's going to be these automated incremental increases to blob capacity that are packaged into Fusaka and get activated a couple weeks after the Fusaka activation. These are called blob parameter only hard forks, BPO hard forks, and they're going to increase the capacity of Ethereum's data availability layer by increasing how many blob transactions can be included in a block. Blobs are these dedicated block space, dedicated transactions that layer 2s particularly can use to submit and post data to Ethereum. And right now it's at a capacity of around a target of 6 blobs per block. With Fusaka, about a week after its activation, the capacity through the first BPO hard fork is going to increase from 6 to 10 blobs, a target of 10 blobs per block. And then thereafter, there's going to be another automated hard fork. And that BPO, the second one, is going to increase blob capacity to 14 blobs per block. So just to say, it's going to be it's going to be like a doubling, more than doubling of blob capacity after Fusaka, but through these very unique and new automated hard fork upgrades that happen very close after Fusaka. So they're testing that right now on Holeshki testnet. The first BPO fork went live on Holeshki yesterday on Tuesday. I think it went well. We'll get more details on this Thursday, tomorrow's developer call. I did notice on the Ethereum R&D Discord that there was a bit of a drop in active validators, online validators, after that first BPO hard fork. But it looks as though the testnet has recovered since. So maybe it's fine. And then the second BPO hard fork is going to go live next Monday. And then developers are going to move on to upgrading the second of the 3 public testnets, Polia testnet, on Tuesday. And it is very important that node operators or application developers, anybody who is on the Sepolia testnet, be aware that there is going to be an upgrade happening on next Tuesday. I'll give you the date right now, October the 14th. Get ready. Update your software if you are a Sepolia node operator. But if you're just running smart contracts, just know there could be some network disruption. On Holeshki, a couple validators went down after the upgrade. So just note that there's going to be potentially some network disruption next Tuesday. And as I say in my ACD After Hours newsletters, it's unlikely that there's going to be anything major found on these test nets that actually push the timeline for Fusaka. Right now, based on how all of the testnet upgrades have been scheduled out, it does look as though developers are going to be able to upgrade Ethereum by early December. And while it's not likely that developers are going to find a major bug, given the track record of how DevNet testing has gone, how Leshki testnet has gone, I also think it's a non-trivial chance that a bug could be discovered. I place it as like 60% likelihood that yes, developers are going to be able to ship Fusaka onto mainnet by early December, but I think there's still a pretty large chance that there's a risk of a bug. That is only going to change, in my view, after the Sepolia testnet upgrade, seeing how that goes. I think developers are just still working through quite a lot of kinks. They did something called split network testing on Fusaka DevNet 3, and I noticed they found some new bugs as well in the Nethermind, Lighthouse, Lodestar, and MS clients. Again, not major issues, but still these are issues that you wouldn't want to see on mainnet. So yes, the timelines are on track. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how the upgrade goes on Tuesday for the Sepolia testnet. I thought I was going to have time to talk about RPCs and the conversation around RPC standardization, which is very relevant to Ethereum and important right now, but there's no time, which is actually a good thing because I'm not going to be obviously talking and spending this entire show every single week talking about show details and show format. I'm just going to be focusing on the updates. So yeah, you will get longer updates and learn more on each episode. But I'm going to try and wrap up now as quickly as possible. But just with the RPC standardization topic, RPC standardization is important for Ethereum. It's the interface in which apps are able to call functions, are able to request data from Ethereum nodes, and very important not just for application developers and for decentralizing reliance away from like centralized RPC providers that specialize in just giving the data as a service or as a business to applications, but for applications just to be able to directly use permissionless Ethereum nodes to do that. So RPC standardization is not just important for application developers and also for decentralization, but it's actually very important for Ethereum scalability. Optimizing RPC response times is very important to the scalability of Ethereum. And someone who taught me that is Aragon developer Giulio Rebuffo. I had a conversation with him in the Meet the Dev series about what's most important and what's an underrated way to contribute to the Ethereum protocol, and he mentioned this very topic. So that is the episode that you can expect next Wednesday. That is the episode that I'm going to be going live with, starting off my guest series for Ready for Merge with. Stay tuned for next week's show, which will feature Giulio's interview from Meet the Devs. A couple of things, 4 things on the back end. Follow/subscribe if you haven't already to the Ready for Merge show so you can be updated when new episodes air. Like, comment, react to what you thought of today's episode, please. I'd love to know what you thought. If you're interested in learning more about anything I talked about, I'll have links in the show notes of today's episode so you can find out more. And then lastly, but not least, fourth, please share the episode with friends and people that you think would be interested. It's a new show, so I'd really appreciate help getting the word out there about the show via word of mouth. Thank you so much for listening. You are now officially caught up on what's ready for merge in Bitcoin and Ethereum. I hope you'll join me again for another episode next week. Until then, talk to you guys. Until then, be well. Talk to you guys next time.